The U.S. and the EU are working toward zero tariffs. What does it mean for the U.S.-China trade war?
这样的话呢，对中国来说是一个非常大的遏制和打击。
Trump might go full force with China on trade. What is his end game?
我认为他有更大的格局，他有些东西没有说出来，但是他做的含义不仅仅是在贸易和经济领域。
Can Russia and the U.S. be friends after all?
他与俄国修复关系呢，是有利于专注应付目前的主要威胁。川普在第一个任期内要重建美俄关系，挑战还是很大。
Welcome to Zooming In. I'm Simone Gao. The Western media has drawn numerous comparisons between Ronald Reagan and Donald Trump, from their unconventional rise to presidency to their unorthodox approaches in dealing with current affairs. On the surface, President Trump is not fighting the same war that Reagan did. For Ronald Reagan, it was the Cold War. For President Trump, it is the ongoing trade war. However, at the core of both wars is the unresolved ideological difference between the free world and the communist regime. In this episode, we'll draw a deeper comparison by focusing on several deterministic factors for winning a war. What are these factors? In our view, they relate to U.S. strategic global alliance, the American people, and the president's willingness to seize the day and make bold moves. Reagan did this, and he made history. Will history repeat itself? Let's take a look.
In 2013, former First Lady Nancy Reagan told USA Today, as Prime Minister, Margaret had the clear vision and strong determination to stand up for her beliefs at a time when so many were afraid to rock the boat. As a result, she helped to bring about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the liberation of millions of people. Donald Trump does not have an iron lady to help him in his trade war against China. European nations are upset with him for imposing steel and aluminum tariffs and for threatening to impose tariffs on auto exports. President Trump demonstrated his willingness to single-handedly level the global trade playing field. On July 24th, he tweeted, "We are the piggy bank that's being robbed." He is on a mission to end that. Europe took notice of his tenacity, similar to how they noticed Ronald Reagan's tenacity in pursuing his policy. History again repeated itself. On July 25th, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker met with President Trump. They agreed to work toward zero tariffs and start a new phase for the U.S.-EU relationship.
We agreed today, first of all, to work together towards zero tariffs, zero non-tariff barriers, and zero subsidies on non-auto industrial goods. Thank you. Thank you. We will also work to reduce barriers and increase trade in services, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, medical products, as well as soybeans. Soybeans is a big deal. And the European Union is going to start almost immediately to buy a lot of soybeans. They're a tremendous market. Buy a lot of soybeans from our farmers.
When I was invited by the President to the White House, I had one intention. I had the intention to make a deal today, and we made a deal.
The latest change in the U.S.-EU relationship shows that China's strategy of rallying Europe against the U.S. failed. Right before that, the Chinese yuan depreciated against the dollar. As of July 25th, the yuan closed at 6.78 and lost 6.9% in 3 months. What does all this mean to China? I discussed these questions with former Peking University professor of economics, David Xia.
这轮新的人民币贬值，您觉得是中共政权做的吗？它给中美贸易战带来了什么样的影响？还有，川普和欧盟主席宣布了谋求美欧之间的零关税，那中共政权要如何应对呢？
由于人民币最近这些年也就是说，
Over the years, the value of the renminbi has been related to China's real economy, its economic environment, risks in its financial system, and money supply. So as I criticize, this approach of the Chinese government over issuing currency will certainly depreciate renminbi significantly. This depreciation is a sure trend in both the mid and long term. Right now, it's so obvious in the short term that some doubt it is a move by the Chinese government. However, I don't see much need for the regime to do so. What it might do at most is leave the currency uninterrupted. As we know, if renminbi is depreciated too much, the authorities may use its foreign exchange reserve, say in large amounts buying renminbi and selling US dollars to keep its currency stable and appreciated to a certain degree. But right now, there's no such need. Yes, generally depreciation will contribute to exports amid the U.S. trade war with China. However, we face a situation in which that method might not necessarily bring about huge interest as expected. It's known that America's stance means it will slap high tariffs on $500 billion worth of Chinese imports. Therefore, China, by devaluing renminbi alone, cannot successfully promote its exports in a usual sense. More importantly, President Trump and European Commission President Juncker issued a statement following their summit that both sides would remove trade barriers, tariffs, and any subsidies, thus creating a free trade zone with zero tariffs and zero subsidies. Mind you, the total population of the two regions is 830 million, nearly 12% of the world's population, and their GDP combined consists of 50% of the world's. With such a tightened free economy for free trade zone, if added up with Japan and some other trading powers, the majority of the global economies, I believe will enter a stage of extremely low, even zero tariff. That will be a disastrous suppression and blow to China. Therefore, the Chinese regime will never change the dynamic with such a minor scheme, depreciation.
Coming up, what is China's true economic and political status? Does President Trump see an opportunity President Reagan saw 32 years ago?
China's true economic and political state is much more turbulent than what the Western world perceives. 32 years ago, when President Reagan gained insight of how vulnerable the Soviet Union's economy was, he didn't hesitate to make a decisive move to bring down the whole thing. Will history repeat itself? Let's first revisit what happened in the 1980s.
In March 1983, Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI.
For over a generation, nuclear strategy has been governed.
SDI soon became the target of negotiations. In October of 1986, Reagan and Gorbachev met in Iceland. Gorbachev proposed concessions in nearly every area of arms control, but under the condition that the U.S. would give up its SDI program. Reagan refused the conditions and walked away with an important insight: that the Soviet Union feared his program. Reagan then tripled America's SDI budget, which soon brought the arms race to an end and led to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Today, when President Trump put tariffs on $50 billion of Chinese goods, and then possibly $200 billion, and then possibly a total of $500 billion, does he see an opportunity similar to the one Reagan saw 32 years ago? In the West, we hear news about China on a daily basis, but we still don't see the turbulence building behind China's Great Firewall. On July 25th, the yuan fell to its lowest of the year after Beijing announced that it would pursue a more vigorous fiscal policy. Despite the policy-driven stock market bounce in 2018, China's economic thermometer, the Shanghai Composite Index, has been trending downward through June 2018. On the same day, a Reuters article revealed that 4,000 high-net-worth investors rushed to banks and occupied them. Management teams from 4 private equity firms under Shanghai Fuxing disappeared over the last month. As a result, investors cannot redeem their investments. Fuxing has 30 billion RMB in assets under its management, one of the largest players in the Chinese market. This is only the latest example of ownership and management disappearing with investors' money. A general observation is that China's macroeconomic status does not support the high-yield promises made by these private equity firms. The bubble will burst in the future. On July 13th, news broke that many public places took down Chinese leader Xi Jinping's poster from their lobbies. By the following week, news spread that the elites and some high CCP officials established an agreement to take down Xi Jinping from his position. Although Xi embarked for Africa as scheduled, indicating he is not in immediate danger of being deposed, the consensus is that he encountered strong resistance within the party. Also, in July, Chinese inspectors announced Changchun Changsheng Biotechnology, China's largest vaccine maker, had violated safety standards. A rough estimate indicated that 250,000 faulty vaccines had been administered to children. This news went viral on Chinese social media, as news like this continues to erode public confidence on food and service safety. Desperately, parents in China took their concerns to the U.S. Embassy website to seek support.
Public outcry and political rumors all point to the mounting pressure the Chinese Communist Party faces. In fact, strong economic growth has been the only source of legitimacy for the Communist Party's rule. If the trade war undermines that, China could go through drastic political changes. Is Trump facing the same situation that Reagan did 32 years ago? Let's hear from David Xia.
川普现在准备好了再给2000亿的中国商品加关税，您觉得他真的有可能最后给所有的中国商品加关税吗？如果这样做的话，他最终想达到的目的是什么呢？
其实呢，川普
In fact, Trump has shown almost all his cards. The purpose of his doing so is to deter China or give it a harsh warning, hoping China will not take any confrontational, retaliatory responses. In that case, tensions will naturally ease up, but if China vows tit-for-tat responses, a trade war will escalate so that both sides will endure significant losses. As I repeatedly stressed, America's strength wouldn't be critically undercut, but China wouldn't be able to endure consequences of this war. Some have doubts. Given his background as a businessman, does Trump only care about commercial interests? I don't think so. He has greater visions, part of which are never mentioned publicly. But his considerations have gone beyond trade and economy. As an admirer of President Reagan, I'm convinced Trump is no less capable when compared with any of his predecessors in terms of international patterns and strategies. So give him time and opportunity, and we'll see he'll come to greater accomplishments in many fields.
面对川普施压，中方一再用激怒川普的方式做回应。您觉得习近平对中美贸易战到底是持什么样的态度呢？他会在这个国内外的双重压力之下进行根本性的改变吗？
习近平呢，他是一个
Well, Xi Jinping, it's said, received only an elementary education. He's a fake doctorate degree holder. Further, his character is somewhat reckless, unlikely to listen to others. So he'll be stubborn and stick to his ideas until his collapse. Despite pressure, resistance, or challenges from within the party over his dictatorship or personality cult, he has renewed another purging campaign and restored his grip on power. Recently, support for his personality cult and dictatorship has resumed. He chose this moment to visit the Middle East and African countries as scheduled, marking his confidence over his control of power. He had to make sure there's no danger or crisis in store for him before his visit. However, many hope that Xi will choose to follow President Chiang Ching-kuo as an example towards constitutional democracy. Under huge pressure, domestic and abroad, will he do it? My answer is a definitive never.
Coming up, how can improved U.S.-Russia relationships help the U.S. in its trade war with China? Amidst the escalating trade war between the U.S. and China, President Trump met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. Both leaders called it a success during their joint press conference afterwards. But President Trump immediately faced criticism from both Democrats and Republicans for his comments relating to Russia's interference in the 2016 election, where he said he didn't know why it would be Russia that interfered. The next day, the president said he misspoke and meant to say, "I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be Russia." He later tweeted, "I'm very concerned that Russia will be fighting very hard to have an impact on the upcoming elections. Based on the fact that no president has been tougher on Russia than me, they will be pushing very hard for the Democrats." Because of ongoing Russian cybersecurity threats, Many were surprised when President Trump invited Putin to the White House. In a July 16th interview on the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, Senator Rand Paul defended the president.
So I think that it is a good idea to have engagement, and I think that what is lost in this is that I think there's a bit of Trump derangement syndrome. I think there are people who hate the president so much that this could have easily been President Obama early in his first administration setting the reset button and trying to have better relations with Russia. And I think it's lost on people that they are a nuclear power. They have influence in Syria. They're in close proximity to our troops in Syria. They are close to the peninsula of North Korea and may have some influence that could help us there. The other thing that's lost, and people forget this completely, the Russians tried to help us stop the Boston Marathon bombing. We actually did help them stop a terrorist attack in St. Petersburg because we were communicating and exchanging information. All those things are good.
Indeed, resetting U.S.-Russia relations could help the United States in a variety of areas, including Syria, Iran, and North Korea. But looking at it from a different angle, it could also help the U.S. in its trade war with China. Although Russia still poses a threat to the United States, the Chinese regime is a much bigger one. So what exactly is President Trump's strategy towards Russia and China? I spoke with senior political commentator Wen Zhao.
川普总统重建美俄关系的目的，您觉得是什么呢？这会让美国在中美贸易战中占据有利的地位吗？
因为川普政府把中国大陆看成
The Trump administration views China as its primary opponent. Restoring the relationship with Russia would help the U.S. to focus on its main threat. Although it's still difficult to accept Russia's annexation of Crimea, from a global strategic perspective, Russia isn't a real opponent for the U.S. Russia has a population of 146 million, more than twice that of South Korea. Its land area is 170 times that of South Korea's. However, its economy ranked behind South Korea in 2017. It's difficult for Russia to make waves. For Russia to become a world power again, it first needs to reintegrate all former Soviet Union countries. This will be difficult to accomplish during Putin's lifetime. So Russia has a long way to go before it can be considered an equal to the U.S. But Russia is one of the 5 permanent members on the United Nations Security Council. To push Russia to Beijing's side is not a wise strategy. Russia interfered with the U.S. election in 2016. The U.S. won't let go of that even though Russia would not admit or apologize for it. So, during Trump's first term, restoring the relationship with Russia remains a great challenge.
您认为中俄有可能成为盟友吗？
中俄现在是准盟友关系，但是以10年以上的眼光看。
Taking a long-term view beyond 10 years, China and Russia lack strategic support to form an alliance. The main reason is that China will find it hard to form close economic ties with Russia. Mutual benefits for China and Russia are only restricted to a few political topics. Geographically, Russia's neighbors are economically weak, such as Mongolia and North Korea. Northeast China is slightly richer, but in recent years, it is economically shrinking. The wealth level is far behind coastal provinces and many inland provinces. Russia borders with many poor regions, which means that they won't stimulate economic growth in Russia. Recovery in Russia will continue to depend on Europe. The trade relationship between China and Russia is also very simple. China purchases energy resources from Russia. However, due to its shale oil technology, the U.S. now is a larger exporter of oil and natural gas. It becomes questionable from a cost-benefit perspective for China to purchase energy from Russia. After the Crimean crisis, China and Russia signed large contracts to purchase energy. Within China, though there isn't agreement on this, some believe that purchasing more expensive energy from Russia, purely based on political motive, isn't really beneficial to China. Another key factor is population. Because of the long-term recession, the Far East population continues to flow to Europe. This causes anxiety for the government since it's difficult to control. So Russia remains suspicious of China, given its growing population. Lastly, China continues to compete with Russia to gain influence over the countries that became independent from the former Soviet Union. All these factors make it challenging for Russia and China to form a long-term stable alliance.
Only 30 years ago, dictator who ruled over the land and people of the Soviet Union sat at the opposite end of the negotiation table with the U.S. They appeared strong and terrifying. 2 years later, after the Cold War ended, the Soviet Union dissolved. Reversing its predecessor's détente foreign policy, Reagan paved the way for the collapse of the behemoth communist regime of his day. Will Donald Trump achieve the same glory for America again? This time, which side would Russia choose? Thanks for watching Zooming In. I'm Simone Gao, and see you next time.